It began in the blistering heat of the Arabian desert, a place where grudges simmered like boiling water under the sun. In the year 624, a small caravan skirmish would spiral into bloodshed, setting the stage for one of the most shocking and ruthless episodes in early Islamic history, the Battle of Badr. What began as a fight over trade routes would end with captured men facing a fate they never imagined. For months, Muhammad's followers in Medina had clashed with the Quraysh of Mecca. Old neighbors turned bitter enemies, raids on caravans, stolen goods, and broken alliances had fueled the hostility. But in March of that year, everything changed. Muhammad set out with barely 300 men to intercept a wealthy Meccan caravan led by Abu Sufyan. The Meccans, furious at the repeated raids, responded with an army nearly 3 times larger. The desert was about to drink deep from the blood of its sons. On the morning of the battle, the Meccans stood proud, armed, armored, and confident. The Muslims, fewer in number, carried mostly simple weapons. Yet in Muhammad's camp, there was a quiet determination. Victory, they believed, would come not from numbers, but from divine backing. To the Meccans, this wasn't a holy war. It was a fight for survival and the right to live without harassment. When the first arrows flew, the dry air was filled with the sound of metal and screams. Sand turned dark with blood. Men who had once traded in the same markets now clashed with lethal intent. Witnesses later spoke of chaos. Horses crashing into shields, swords cutting through flesh, and cries for mercy swallowed by the roar of battle. The Meccans, though stronger, began to falter under the relentless push of the smaller force. Hours later, against all odds, the Muslims claimed victory. 70 Meccans lay dead, and another 70 were taken prisoner. For those captured, relief was short-lived. They thought they would be ransomed or spared, as was often the custom in tribal warfare. But in the days ahead, their fates would take a darker turn, revealing that the battle was not the end, but the beginning of another kind of cruelty. The sun was setting over Badr. The battlefield was silent, except for the groans of the wounded and the slow, deliberate footsteps of the victors. The Meccans' bodies lay scattered, their armor gleaming faintly in the dying light. The survivors, bound with ropes, bloodied but breathing, were dragged toward Medina. Among them were merchants, warriors, and even poets, men whose only crime was standing on the other side of a war they hadn't asked for. At first, the prisoners believed the nightmare was over tribal custom, dictated, ransom, or exchange. A chance to go home in one piece. Some were highborn, their families able to pay dearly. Others were common men, hoping mercy would find them. But whispers began to circulate in the Muslim camp. Whispers that not all of them would leave Medina alive. Muhammad gathered his closest advisors. What to do with the prisoners? Some argued for mercy. Others saw an opportunity. Ransom would bring wealth, and execution would send a message. The decision, when it came, was not uniform. Some were spared for gold. Others, especially those known for their words, their ability to criticize and sway hearts, were marked for death. In the Arabian world, poets held dangerous power. A well-crafted verse could ruin reputations, stir tribes to war, or call out hypocrisy. Some of the captives had spoken against Muhammad, mocking him in verse, challenging his authority. For that, their fate was sealed. Their crime was not murder, theft, or treachery. It was speech. Under the cover of darkness, selected prisoners were led away. They were not armed. They were not fighting. They were bound, kneeling in the sand. Witnesses spoke of no trial, no defense, only the swift arc of the sword and the dull thud of bodies hitting the ground. The desert, once again, swallowed its dead without ceremony. For their families, no chance to say goodbye. For history, a lesson in how victory can twist into vengeance. Among the captives was a man named al-Nadr ibn al-Harith. He wasn't a general or a soldier of renown. He was a storyteller, a merchant, and a poet. His verses were sharp, yes, but they were words, not weapons. In the marketplaces of Mecca, he would recite tales from Persia, weaving epics of kings and heroes. Sometimes, he would poke fun at Muhammad's recitations, questioning their divine origin. In times of peace, it would have been harmless rivalry. In times of war, it became a death sentence. In Medina, the prisoners were divided. Those with wealthy families were held for ransom. Al-Nadr was not among them. He was pulled aside, bound more tightly than the rest. No official charges were read, no chance to speak in his own defense. The march to his execution site was silent except for the crunch of sand underfoot. He knew where he was going and that he would not be coming back. The executioners did not make speeches. They did not allow farewells. Al-Nadr's hands were bound, his eyes fixed on the desert horizon. Perhaps he thought of the stories he'd never tell, the verses that would remain unwritten. A flash of steel caught the moonlight, and in a heartbeat, the man who once filled marketplaces with laughter and song was gone. His body was left where it fell, the night wind already erasing the footprints of those who had brought him there. The killing of al-Nadr was not an act of necessity. It was a message that criticism would be met not with debate, but with death. That the sword could silence what the mind could not refute. For those watching, fear settled in their bones. This was not justice. This was elimination. Centuries later, the Battle of Badr is often remembered as a miraculous victory for a small, outnumbered force. But in the shadows of that triumph lie the unmarked graves of men like al-Nadr ibn al-Harith, men who paid with their lives for words. Strip away the banners, the chants, and the glory, and what remains is the oldest story of all. Power crushing dissent and history written by the victors.